Welcome. We are very happy today to be able to introduce you to U.S. Senator Tammy Duckworth and hear her thoughts on a whole range of issues about women, power, and disrupting the status quo. Senator Duckworth has a very long and distinguished career in public service. She was among the first handful of Army women to fly combat missions. She is an Iraq war veteran and a recipient of the Purple Heart. In 2004, she was deployed to Iraq as a Black Hawk helicopter pilot. Her helicopter was hit by a rocket-propelled grenade, and from that attack, she lost both legs and partial use of her right arm. She spent over a year in recovery. Since then, she has done things that most of us would not do in a lifetime. She served in the Army Reserve, retiring with the rank of Lieutenant Colonel in 2014. She served as an Assistant Secretary of the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs starting in 2009, was elected to the U.S. House of Representatives in 2012 and served 2 terms, and was elected in 2016 to the United States Senate. Senator Duckworth has been a role model and advocate for women in many ways. As just one example, I remember when she became the first senator to give birth while serving in office, and she then took her infant child to work on the Senate floor, conducting business and voting and sending a message to women and men alike about the importance of family-friendly policies at work. There is no question that Senator Duckworth knows a great deal about women, power, and disrupting the status quo. Please join me in welcoming her to the World Forum for Women in Law.
Hello.
Hello. We're so glad to have you here. Let me begin by asking you something that I think will be of great interest to us, and that is about your childhood and your background as a child of immigrant parents. How do you think those childhood experiences influenced who you are and what you became as a person?
Well, only one of my parents is an immigrant. On my father's side of the family, we've been here since before the revolution. In fact, there's been a Duckworth in uniform in every period of conflict in our nation's history, going back to the French and Indian Wars. So since about the 1600s. My mother is an immigrant. She became a US citizen in her 50s. But I grew up in Southeast Asia. My father was a Vietnam War veteran. He actually was an older Vietnam War veteran because he had also served in World War II and Korea. He was in France during the Korean War, but his military service ended with Vietnam. And then he just stayed in Southeast Asia, and he got jobs working for the United Nations and UN development programs and refugee programs, bringing aid to refugees. And then later on, he went to work for corporations. And so I grew up all throughout Southeast Asia, getting to see, as an American, America from the perspective of those outside of America, which is really, I think, very valuable. I don't think most Americans see and understand how the rest of the world views us. And growing up in Southeast Asia, America was very much a country that people looked up to. Not because, we were a military might. I mean, we just lost the Vietnam War, so we were not a military might. But they looked up to us because of things like the Peace Corps and the USAID programs and our standing up for the rule of law and what was happening. And so my childhood was a very international one. But one where I could be very proud and very patriotic to be an American because of how the rest of the world viewed us in such a favorable light.
Did that influence how you became interested in politics, or what led you to go into politics?
When I was about 8 years old, I decided that I wanted to become a U.S. ambassador. Because I would follow my dad. The U.S. ambassador was always the one that was like cutting a ribbon at a ribbon opening, cutting a ribbon open for a new hospital or a charitable, or they were bringing bags of rice to refugees. And I thought, wow, I I get to serve, but I could get to serve in this way. And my dad's service was very military, and his family service had always been military. And I have a younger brother, so my brother was expected to serve in the military, but I knew that I needed to serve, and I thought I could serve in the foreign service. So I was studying towards a foreign service exam, and taking that exam when I would, and I was working on my PhD actually as part of that process when I was deployed to Iraq.
So I want to fast forward. You're now a US Senator. It's a very distinguished position. Are there, and I guess this is particularly timely now, are there parts of being a senator that you really like and parts that you wish would go away?
Well, what I really like is the constituent services. There's nothing more rewarding than doing a town hall or stopping at a gas station and someone comes up to you and says, "You're my senator and I have a problem." And then you get to solve it for them. Helping veterans get their VA benefits, helping somebody, a small business owner who's been having trouble with the SBA or trying to get a grant or something. That is really the most rewarding part of my job is constituent services. I love that more than anything. What do I hate? I hate campaigning for elections. I hate fundraising. I hate all of that side of American politics that I wish we could get rid of, and we could if we had universal, public financing of campaigns, so that there would be no outside money, and let people be judged based on who they are and their policies. I think that would be fantastic. But the most rewarding is constituent services.
So let me turn to one of the themes of this conference, which is women in power. And I'd like to ask you about your observations and experiences about women in power. And let me just start with something very basic. When we use that phrase, women in power, what does that, women and power, maybe women in power as well, what does that mean to you?
Well, what comes to mind is that the two are not usually together. Usually women are not the ones who have the power. There's usually a separation between the two. And if you said women in power, my response would be nowhere near enough of them. Because I think the system is set up, whether it's in the business sector or in government or even in the military, the system is set up that there are too many off ramps that women are forced by circumstances to take on that road to power, and that they never get there. And more women take those off ramps, whether they're pushed onto those off ramps or whether they choose to because it just gets to be too difficult, and they never get to the top, and they never get to the destination of being that woman in power and having that power, whether it's occupying a C-suite in the corporate sector, or as yourself, being able to successfully start your own business, or rising to the very top ranks in the military. And many of those off ramps have to do with family and childbearing and lack of support. Many of those off ramps have to do with structural obstructions in the military. Women couldn't serve in combat roles, that sort of thing. And many of those off ramps are just, ones that are of convenience. I mean, you just get to be so tough that you just can't balance your life and career anymore, and you have to choose.
So that's very interesting. I know that off ramp is a concept, but you're really giving it a lot of teeth. And unfortunately, do you think there are things that either local, state, or federal government can do to make that off ramp go away, at least in part?
Oh, there are many things we can do. There are several that we can start right away. Universal pre-K, some sort of universal childcare, support for childcare, so that we actually help people be able to afford childcare, so women can afford to stay at work. President-elect Biden has come up with several plans for how we can do this. Family leave policy, so that you can take time off to go take care of your family or to have a child, and still be able to come back and pick up and get back to work at where you were. So there are many things that we can do right away at state and local levels, as well as the federal level, that would get rid of some of those off ramps.
You know, in the pandemic, there's been a lot of writing and some research about how the pandemic has been especially hard on women with children. And I think that businesses are beginning to be aware of that. Is there any kind of coalition or or initiative that you would especially focus on to make changes in that regard?
With childcare,
Yes.
yeah, so I have a bill called Child Care for Working Families Act. Senator Patty Murray and she is on the committee. So she's co-sponsoring it with me. We're introduced it together. This bill would actually make sure that no low or middle income family pays more than 7% of their income on childcare. It would also invest in training for childcare workers because we don't have enough of them, and those that we do are paid at the lowest. I mean, why do we pay the people who take care of the most precious thing we have, our children, the least amount of money, right? Childcare workers are at the lowest end of the pay scale. And then we would need to expand, it would expand access to high quality preschool for low and middle income 3 and 4-year-olds. And this is really critical because studies have shown that how well a child reads at the 4th grade is predicted by whether or not they went to preschool and kindergarten. So if they got preschool and kindergarten, then they have a literacy level at the 4th grade that is much higher than if they do not. And their performance at the 4th grade reading level actually is predictive of whether or not somebody graduates high school and goes on to college. So it all goes right back to pre-K and kindergarten.
So let me ask you a different perspective about women in power. Do you think there are certain personal qualities that are critical for women in order to use power? Are there personal qualities or factors that come into play when women try to gain or use power?
I think that the key thing is getting to the point where you think you're entitled to that power. Emily's List, which is the organization Early Money is Like Yeast. They invest in women who are running for office. They did a study, and their study showed that on average, a female candidate for office has to be asked 7 times to run before she finally says yes and decides to run, whether it's for city council, library board of trustees, or the United States Senate. She has to be asked 7 times before she says yes to run for office. Men, on the other hand, wake up in the morning, look in the mirror while they're shaving and think, well, how come I'm not a US senator? You know, and so women have to get past that 7 times. We have to believe that we are entitled to power, that we're entitled to be in that leadership position and run for those offices or compete for that job, because that's a big part of it. And once you feel and know that you're entitled to that power, then you can wield it more effectively. I'll be honest, I wake up every day with imposter syndrome. I go to work and the people that I work with are, Elizabeth Warren and, some of the greats, in the Senate and Patrick Leahy, who's been there since he voted to pass Medicare, so I have imposter syndrome every day, but I still have to believe that I'm entitled to be a United States Senator because my voters, my constituents believed in me and trusted I can carry out my job and take care of them. And in believing that allows me to take charge of the power that I have as a United States Senator to do that constituent services, to serve my people, to serve my country. And so I think that for me is the key, is believing that you're entitled to that power. And then you have to, wield it in a way that is responsible and ethical, and hopefully as women, that we do it in a way that maybe is a little bit more compassionate.
Really wonderful advice. I actually have a related question. I'm sure that you've had a lot of experience with teams and teamwork. Tell us why you think teams are important in workplaces.
Teams are really important because you never know who's going to have that talent or that skill, who's going to step up in a moment of crisis or when there's a challenge. You may think you know who those people are. It's funny, before we were deployed to Iraq, we all knew who the who the superstars were in our unit. Like I knew who my best pilots were. I knew who my, my kind of lazy guys were, but you know what, once we deployed and we were downrange in a combat zone, the people who stepped up were not always the ones who were superstars back at home. Uh, on the day that I was shot down in Iraq, my team in my helicopter consisted of me, the highest ranking officer, a warrant officer who's very experienced, more experienced than I as a pilot, but I outranked him he was the pilot in command. I was the co-pilot. I had a crew chief who was a sergeant, and then I had a young man in my group, in my aircraft, who was my door gunner, a volunteer to be a door gunner. He's 20 something, big kid from Central Illinois, from Peoria. I sort of, this just starting out. And at the end, he was the lowest ranking guy, had the least amount of information, the lowest pay. At the end of the day, he was the one who took his weapon and walked towards the enemy and stood guard and set up the perimeter, allowing me to be rescued. At the end of that day, I was the weakest person on the crew, the person who couldn't take care of myself, and others had to carry me out. Whereas I started out the person in charge. You never know. You never know. So you have to be good to everyone in your team, because that lowest ranking person might have that nugget of information that you've overlooked, may have a hidden skill that you don't know about that helps your team to be successful. Every person is important. Yes, we all have a hierarchy. We all have jobs to do, but you can't overlook any one person, because you never know. It's like the guy at my daughter loves Cheetos. It's like the janitor who came up with the Cheetos, flaming hot Cheetos flavor, right? Which has become like the biggest seller for the Cheetos brand snack. And it was a janitor who came up with that flavoring. You never know. So you got to be good to everyone on the team.
So it sounds like you probably have some ideas as well on what makes a leader a good leader.
Well, the
Can you
Army
share
taught me
those?
that. The Army taught me that. The Army taught me that loyalty goes both ways, that rank has its privileges, but rank also has its responsibilities. And as a leader, you never do anything, you never ask your people to do something that you wouldn't be willing to do yourself. So if you are going to set up a schedule for who cleans the latrines, you better be the first person to clean those latrines before you assign other people to do them. And that if you expect your troops to be loyal to you, you have to be loyal to them. That means you have to be willing to do whatever it is you're asking them to do. And that, that was instilled into me in the Army, and that's how I run my office to this day, that loyalty goes both ways. You can expect and demand loyalty, but you have to be loyal back. We're seeing in the White House right now a president who's not loyal to those beneath him. And you see how dysfunctional that gets. And you start losing team members when you're not loyal to them after they've been loyal to you.
So in settings that you've been in other than the Army, what have you noticed are good qualities of leaders?
I think it's straightforwardness. Well, I'll give you an example. Two examples really, but one person, Nancy Pelosi. I When I was first elected to the House, and I had to cast a vote because I came from a very conservative district. Even though I'm a Democrat, my district was very conservative. It was Henry Hyde's old district. Many of the population was. And so I had to vote. I had to cast a vote. I was one of 16 Democrats to cast a vote along with the Republicans. And I knew I was going to vote in a way that Leader Pelosi did not want me to vote. So I went and I told her. And I will tell you that the talking to that I got from her, without her ever raising her voice, made my face melt. It was scorching. It was a dressing down like I have never ever had before. But at the end of it, she looked at me and she said, "But Tammy, at least you had the integrity and the guts to tell me to my face, and I respect you for that." And then she did a 180 on her stilettos and marched away. And she never retaliated against me. She never took action against me. I went to her, I told her why. She didn't agree with me. She told me in very strong terms why she didn't agree with me, but she respected that I was straightforward with her, and she honored that. And she never retaliated. And the second time, she actually appointed me to leadership. So we were sitting in a leadership meeting, and one of the female members said something and had an idea. We were going around the table, and she does this all the time. The female, one of their other reps said something, and then we went on, the discussion went on, and then two or three persons down the line was a male rep, and he said the same thing she just said. And then everybody started paying attention to him as it was his idea, but it was a female rep, 15 minutes earlier, it was her idea, but people sort of glossed over it. And Leader Pelosi, because when I was with her, she was leader, she was not yet speaker, said, wait a minute, that was her idea. Let's go back and have her present it. So she was very careful to be, and continues to be, very inclusive, and really lifts up voices that tend to get overlooked.
One of the messages that comes out from what you've just said is the importance of speaking truth to power and not being afraid. Can you comment about that?
Yeah, I think it's the most American thing that you can do. The right to protest. I mean, we just saw last week on Wednesday, folks who claimed that they were protesting, but actually took up arms against the nation by storming the Capitol. But truthfully, peaceful protests, speaking truth to power, is the most American thing we can do. We were the nation that said to King George, "No, you will not tax us without representation. We will have our way, and this will be a government of, for, and by the people." And so I think it's important to be able to, you need to know your facts. And if you are sure in your facts and you are sure in your convictions, then stand your ground and speak truth. No, it doesn't matter who you're talking to, whether it's the president of the United States or my 6-year-old daughter, stand your ground and state it the way you are, and have the courage of your convictions. And people respect that.
Let me turn to a kind of related topic, and that is, I think that a lot of women in professions have been surprised at how long it's taken for women to achieve, I don't want to say parity, but even to achieve some level of leadership in organizations. And that leads to the phrase, how do we disrupt the status quo? So are there times when you feel you've disrupted the status quo and that it was important to do that?
I think since I've been in the House and the Senate, I think I have, because I've I've been very careful to make sure that in my hiring, that I include, diversity as a major component of of my decision making. So my chief of staff is a woman, my deputy chief of staff is a woman, for example. So I to offer those opportunities to other women and to people of color to have those opportunities for leadership and to mentor them. And that's how you disrupt the status quo. Because I mean, in the House and in the Senate in Washington, D.C., the status quo is this: it's white men. Not that it's it's just the way it's been, because it's usually, you see that many congressmen and senators, their fathers were congressmen or senators before them, or they were a page, or they were a staff member on some senator's staff. And they naturally, that's just a career path for them. I'm going to start off as an intern because my dad got me this internship, and then I'm going to get the staff assistant position. I'm going to become, and then I'm going to go back and run for the office myself. But the women in Washington, you'll see many of them did something else and got frustrated and then decided to run for office.
Mm.
So there is not this structure that nurtures young women from the time they graduate from college towards becoming a U.S. Congresswoman. Usually it's women who've done something else and got mad, like I did, that we weren't taking care of veterans, and then came back and run for office. It's a different structure. And so we need to disrupt the status quo by creating our own structures. And that's why I'm part of this group called 2044. It's an initiative that by 2044, at least half or a majority of the staff members in Washington will be women, persons of color. And Sherrod Brown, Senator Sherrod Brown, and I were co-sponsors of that this past year.
That's fascinating, really. And I'm glad that you mentioned it. I'm not sure many people know about it, so it's terrific to know. You also mentioned the word mentor. Have you benefited from mentors, or some of us think of it, sponsors, in the course of your various careers?
I've been very fortunate. And you know what? It's all been white men. And that's what I say to people. I said, we have allies. We can all have allies in many places. It's like that. Everyone on your team is important. Don't overlook someone because of who they are or what rank they have. Same thing with allies. Don't overlook an ally just because they don't fit an image of what you think an ally might be. So my entire career, it's always been white men because I was in my helicopter unit, the only woman of color in my platoon, and then in my company. I oftentimes was the only woman in the all male unit. Sometimes there were, one or two other women pilots beside me, but most of the time I was the only one. So there were only white men around me, and it was white men who mentored me. So I had a great company commander when I was a cadet who told me, you better compete to become a Black Hawk pilot. That's the future. And I listened to him. It was, Dick Durbin, our senior senator from Illinois, who, when I met him as a wounded warrior in Walter Reed, looked at me in that hospital and didn't see the wheelchair, didn't see someone to be pitied who just lost her legs and couldn't move her arm. He looked at me and he saw potential, and he nurtured that potential, and he challenged me, and then said, you need to run for Congress. He didn't see what I couldn't do. He saw what I could do, he saw me for someone who could serve and who was hungry for another mission because I could no longer serve in uniform. So my mentors have all been white men, and I'm very fortunate for it. So that is what that's a lesson I tell folks: find mentors wherever you can, and be a mentor wherever you can. And don't just mentor one particular group, mentor everyone. A woman in power, a person of color in power, is a good example, not just for young women in power or people of, not just for young women or people of color. It's also a good example for that young white man to see that a woman can be someone in power.
Well, let me ask you about sort of how women can speak about themselves and move forward in this sense. Many times, some women have expressed the view that they're afraid to speak out. It's a kind of fear of what will happen. Have you ever had the experience of being afraid to say something that you know is important to say? Or how has fear or lack of fear shaped your approach to helping people and speaking out?
This ties to what I said earlier about owning your power. You must feel entitled to your power. So early on in my military career, as the only woman in oftentimes all male units, I felt tremendous peer pressure to be one of the guys, to be a good egg, to be, a non-disruptor, and to be part of the status quo. And I wanted to prove myself that I was a good pilot. But that meant doing things like when I was in flight school, the guys wanted to go to strip clubs, and I would go with them. And I was uncomfortable, but I went with them because I wanted to be seen as one of the guys. And I love the compliment. Hey, Duckworth's one of us. Don't worry about her. She's just one of us. That to me was the highest compliment. So I was afraid to speak out and say, you know what, this is not appropriate. We shouldn't be doing this. And I remember about 10 years in, I had just been promoted to captain. So I got a new rank. And I felt a little bit more confident in myself and who I was as an officer. I was mid-career at this point, and we were on a trip to Hawaii on a training exercise for the Indo-Pacific region, and we got one night off. And my higher ranking officers said to me, because I had grown up partially in Hawaii, he said, hey, Duckworth, why don't you, are there any strip clubs here? Can you take us to a strip club? And there was about a dozen of us on this trip. And these three higher ranking officers, said, and I guess I just had enough of it. And I having just been promoted, I felt secure in myself. I just looked at him. I said, no, we're not doing that, sir. I'm not going to the strip club. If you want to go, you go. You can call a cab, but I'm taking this rental van and I'm going to go have a nice dinner. Any of you guys want to come with me? Knock on my door, and I'll tell you when we're leaving, and I'll take you guys on we'll go have a nice dinner on the beach where I know there's a good place to have dinner that's not too expensive. But sirs, you want to go to strip club, you can go. So I basically told them to, shove it. And I knew, and at the time they were like, ooh, Duckworth, being all like, ooh, there's all of that sort of like noise and stuff. But the rest of that afternoon, I got knock, knock, knock. Hey, Tammy, we want to go to dinner with you. Knock, knock, knock. Hey, Tammy, go to dinner with you. And at the end of the day, I had like 8 guys come to dinner with me, and the 3 went to the strip club. And the 8 guys had all told each other that they were coming to dinner with me just to keep me company because they felt sorry for me. But none of them wanted to go. And many of them were older than me. And I realized I had been such a poor leader. I was worried about myself. And I was afraid of the higher ranking officers. I was afraid to say no to them. But these folks who were my subordinates, if I, as the only woman in the group, couldn't say no and couldn't speak truth to the power and say, no, we're not going to do that, how were these folks who were lower ranking going to do it, especially when a woman was willing to go? How could the men who didn't want to go say, I don't want to go to the strip club, if the one woman was willing to go and was, one of the guys? And that's when I learned my lesson. And it wasn't until I owned my own power and felt that I could stand up to those officers, those higher ranking officers, and tell them to go shove it. I'm going to go have a nice dinner. I'll never forget that lesson.
That's interesting because sometimes there are life lessons that you literally never forget and stay with you. And that it sounds like that really was one of them. Let me ask you about diversity, because you mentioned earlier that diverse teams really work better. And yet, in many settings, in many work settings, it's been difficult to have diverse teams, and it's been difficult to advance a diverse cadre of leaders. Do you have 1 or 2 pieces of advice that you would give to people about how they can help foster not just diverse teams, but leaders who are diverse as well?
Yeah, I think that diversity and inclusion are 2 different words. I just learned that. I was just speaking with Lloyd Austin, who's our current nominee to be Secretary of Defense. I was just speaking with him just before our conversation here today. And I was asking him about diversity in the military and what are we going to do to make sure there's diversity at the highest level. And he said something really profound. He said, well, that diversity and inclusion are 2 different things. Diversity is being invited to the dance. Inclusion is being asked to dance. And I think sometimes we make sure that our teams are diverse, but we don't actually empower those team members with the authority and the ability to truly be team members, and to really perform and be part of the decision-making process. And we also have to recognize that because there's been a lack of diversity at the highest level in all aspects of our nation, I mean, not just in government or in the military, but also in business, that some people from diverse backgrounds may need a little extra help with their skill sets. So we have to be able to work together and mentor people along the way. So I think that diversity for diversity's sake is not successful. You have to make sure people are included, that there's inclusivity, that people are truly team members and truly responsible for things and contributing things, as opposed to just being on the team so that you have the right number of colors in your in the group photo, if that makes sense.
So it does, and it sounds like I think you probably also have the sense that diverse teams draw on the broadest array of talent from any group that you're working with, and that diversity and inclusion is really meaning having the best talent that you can have in any given workplace.
Yeah, I mean, I spent 23 years in the Army. Every team I was part of was diverse, and we never had problems. Because we all had the same training and we all had the same standards and we knew what we were performing to. And so in the military, you've got 40% diversity among the ranks, most of the ranks that are out there. And that's because of how the military recruits and trains, but we all had the same level of training and capability. We knew what our portion was on that team. In that helicopter, you're the pilot, you're the co-pilot, you're the crew chief, you're the door gunner. You know exactly how everybody fits into that. And you know what those roles are and what that mission is, and it's a shared mission. And you all know and trust in each other's ability to do their jobs, because you know that everyone's been trained in the exact same way to do those jobs to a certain standard. I don't think you see that as much in the civilian sector. But for me, my experience with diverse teams from the military, they've always been successful. Whenever we've had diverse teams, they've been successful. Um, but there was that underlying, structure, that foundation that already existed with, in terms of the joint mission, the shared mission, and the shared training, and the shared experiences.
And it sounds like there also may have been leadership from the top to say this is important and valuable.
Hmm. Exactly.
Um, let me ask you, as we're winding down here, can you leave us with any advice or thoughts or ideas about women power and disrupting the status quo? Something that maybe ties in together that you'd like to tell us.
I think the advice that I tell young women or young people in general is, to be willing to lose, to be willing to defeat, to accept defeat, and then get over it. So I think a lot of times, women won't try something until they know that they're going to be able to be successful at it. Like they do all this preparation before they try it. And what I tell folks is don't be afraid of defeat. I ran for a congressional seat in 2006 and lost, and I was devastated. I thought I would never ever run again. But you know what? I ran again 6 years later, and I was a better candidate 6 years later, and I won then. Um, Oftentimes, I think when women experience defeat, they stop. They don't come back and try it again. And that, you need to come back and try it again and again, whether it's in business, trying to start your own business. Your first business might not be successful, but you learn something, that okay, the next business I start, I'm not going to make that mistake again. So what I tell folks is that don't be afraid to fall down. Don't be afraid to stumble. Even in falling and stumbling, you learn something that will make you better the next time. And hopefully you won't stumble over the same mistake the next time. So be willing to do that, and that'll help you get that experience, and be able to get to a position where you are going to be a woman of power.
That's terrific advice for people of all ages.
Mhm.
Let me thank you again. It's been wonderful to have you here. We're really delighted to get your wisdom and learning, and we wish you the best of luck in 2021.
Thank
Thank
you
you very
so
much.
Thank you.
Applause.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks for having me on. Take care.